We're going to have 2 men up here at least, unless it's some exceptional circumstance. They're going to count, and they got a sheet back here where they account for the checks and what checks were given and how much, not so much the names, but just the amounts. They will put down that there were 5 20s and 2 10s, and they'll write those numbers down on a sheet. And then they'll sign it, and then all the money then goes into a pouch. It goes to Gary, the treasurer, and then he deposits that. Why do we do all that? I've seen a church where the one man who was the treasurer, he walked up after church, took all this money, folded it all up, put it in his pocket, and went home. And he counted it at home, and then he, they never gave a report to the people of the money or anything like that. Was he an honest man? Yes. Is that as good a method of doing it as what we do in a church like this where there's lots of people? I don't think so. And I think it fits that passage, let all things be done honorably in the sight of all men. There's no question when you give money here, it's going to be accounted for to the penny as best we can, and it's going to be overseen by more than one person. So I can't take some for myself. Gary doesn't keep any for himself. One guy counting it doesn't keep some for himself because more than one person deals with it. So can those people conspire and steal? Yeah, they can. Much harder, though, over time to do that. So is that the intended meaning by Paul when he wrote that? Maybe not that application, but I think that's a proper application of that principle, at least in my opinion. So that's what I mean by this. And then we're reading somebody else's mail. The Bible was not written to you personally. You're reading somebody else's mail. Might that apply to you? Yes. Might it influence? Yes. But you have to understand, so you have to infer the meaning that any passage has to you. You have to make an inference there that this passage then means that to me. And we'll come to that. That's the hard part of Bible interpretation. So because of this, there are 2 steps to any interpretation of Scripture. One of them is, what did he intend to say to the original recipients? That's the first thing you have to figure out by, once you understand the words and what they mean, you have to then, in a basic sense, what does this mean to the people it was written to? Now then, the second step is, how does this apply to me? When you read denominational works on how to study the Bible, they skip to a large degree the first step there because it's all what's he said, and they go right to the second. So you read a passage in the Bible, what's this mean to you? That's the wrong question to ask when you first read it. What's it mean to me? You're being tempted to just pull a meaning out of the air. This is what it means to me. And the implication behind that is that you can make it mean whatever you want to you. This is fitting today. What are we supposed to do with anything we hear? Well, that's my truth. That's your truth. My truth can be different than your truth. Isn't that what we're taught today? Everybody gets their own truth. Well, when you start off by asking the question, what does this mean to me? You're emphasizing the me part of it rather than what is actually it's saying here, and understanding that, and then you can make a proper, reasonable application to what it means to you. A question came up on a forum I'm on. It was about 1 Timothy chapter 5, about these widows who would be enrolled and put on a list there. And they had to be 60 years old and destitute and so forth in 1 Timothy 5. Well, how come churches don't do that anymore? Or they were asking, there are some churches that don't hold to that 60-year thing, 60 years old thing. And I said, well, of course there are. We live in a time when people don't care what it says there. But if you want to understand how that verse about what we call widows indeed applies today, you have to understand what he was saying back then. He wasn't talking about helping out a needy widow like Danny Dow's widow, the man who died out in Texas, who's 60 years old, a preacher, with no life insurance and 6 sons. He wasn't talking about helping that woman out. He was talking about a woman who is older and doesn't want to marry again and has no other family, and she wants to be put on a list to be taken care of by the church so she can work to do the work of the Lord. How often do we have widows in churches today that have no children, no nephews, and are destitute? How often in modern America, as prosperous as we are, does that situation arise? Hardly ever. Because widows' children now live. Back in ancient times, they might have 6 children, and by the time they're old, all their kids are dead. Or they're destitute. They didn't have all the... So that doesn't come up as often. Will it still apply? If we had that situation arise today, I personally would insist that the woman be 60 years old, at least, to do that, to put on a permanent role. Can we help a younger widow from the treasury if she needs help? Of course. Just like anybody else that is a saint can be helped. Can we put her on a permanent role? No. Now, anyway, that's the 2 steps. I'm probably too far afield here. Getting too many issues, and you're going to focus on those. Where was I? I can't figure out why this is not working right. Let me go down here. All right. So let's skip that. We're going to use 3 tools: a Bible, our eyes, and a pencil. This independent personal Bible study is not about you learning to use a Greek concordance. That's a good thing to do. That's not what this study is about. We'll talk about that at the end of the study, toward the end. It's not about you learning Greek or Hebrew. It's about you being able to read the English in front of you, because 99% of the time, the English you have in front of you is perfectly translated, is perfectly acceptable, if you're using a literal translation. Yes, sir. Nothing up there. Okay, it must have died on me. There you go. Is that better? Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. I hit the wrong key. Instead of trying to go and find where I was, I hit the kill the slideshow key. Anyway, the English translation, if you're using a literal version like the King James, the New King James, the New American Standard, New International Version, English Standard Version, ESV, one of those versions. I think the Simple English Bible is a literal translation. If you're using one of those versions, the translation that you have is perfectly adequate to do what we're going to do, because it's a literal translation. If you're using Good News for Modern Man or The Message, you're not using a literal translation, and I suggest that you don't use them for this study. I really suggest, if you want to know my personal opinion, that you throw them in the trash. But they're just some man's opinion about what he thinks it says. These other translations have been compiled by groups of people, many of them not even believers. They're just Greek scholars that are looking at what it says. So they don't have an axe to grind in the matter. And you don't necessarily want a religious person to translate these words. Why would I say that? I know that's shocking. Huh? Because he's going to give you his bias on it. That's why we have the word baptize, for example, in the Bible instead of immerse. The text says immerse. But there was a controversy among with the Anglican Church and all that about whether you dipped or sprinkled, and so they wouldn't put that dipping in there. They wouldn't put immersing. They just took the Greek words and just brought it over into English, letter by letter, left it generic. So then anybody could argue whatever position they wanted to argue from it. It's unfortunate to some degree. But yes, you can still find the truth if you dig a little deeper, but huh? Well, on the other hand, see, Gary, I agree and I disagree. I agree and mildly disagree in the sense that you can go to Acts chapter 8 when it gets to the eunuch, and you can say that he and the sea here is water, and they come to water, and he and the eunuch went into the water, and he baptized him. That obviously does not mean they waded waist deep in the water, and then he sprinkled some on his head. It means he dipped him. You can see that, and then they came out of the water. You can see this from that passage, you see. But you're right. Knowing the Greek word makes a difference, and there are times when you need to know that. But for our purposes, and most purposes, you just need a Bible, your eyes, and a pencil to start this process. Because the Greek lexicon won't do you any good if you can't use the Bible, your eyes, and a pencil. The Greek lexicon is just going to lead you astray. Because you're going to focus on the wrong thing. You're not going to focus on the text. Now, we looked at this picture. I gave them out. I don't know if I got any. There must be back there, of this story of the Agassiz and the fish. You can read that for yourself. Now then, let's move to the next chapter, the next thing. The composition of the Bible. If you open it up there, get past that table of contents, how to pronounce Deuteronomy, Leviticus, how to pronounce those words like we did that with that young lady. Then we came to this idea. The Bible is literature. I know how most of you hate the word literature. You hate it because you think it means, whatever. You think Shakespeare or whatever. But the Bible is literature. It's a book, a collection of books. And therefore, it's literature. Now, here's the important thing you got to remember about this. I'll probably repeat this a dozen times in this class. Do not neglect. And that story of the fish, if you read it, what was the problem the young man had? He wasn't even seeing the obvious right in front of him. At first, he missed the obvious things about this fish. He just had to keep looking. The most obvious thing about the Bible is that it is a book of words. God did not communicate to us with emotions. God did not do a pantomime or a mime. He did not do a play, drama. He did not communicate to us with music. Do we have any music in the Bible? Be careful. Oh, well, we have the Psalms. They're music. Really? What are the Psalms composed of in the Bible that you have? What are the Psalms composed of? Words. Are they composed of musical notes? No, they're composed of words. The Bible is a book of words. So if you don't like words, the Bible's not for you. But most of you do like words because you're flapping your gums all the time. Okay? And you're listening to other people flap their gums all the time. You can't even think without words. God invented words. That's how, in his mind, he decided to make a creature that could understand words. And he had to communicate with that creature through words, not through drama and play. You see churches putting on plays. You see churches with, music. The music, they have all these interludes of long music. And that's not how the Bible says we're to communicate God's message. We're communicated with words. And so you have to do some effort to, if you don't naturally know how to understand words, it might take an effort on your part to get this. But that's why I insist that you look at words. So the Bible as a whole is an inspired unit. And hang on a minute here. I did it again, Gary. I didn't start. Oh. I did all that at the beginning so I would have it on tape. We don't use tapes, but recording. Because Gary asked me to record these classes. I didn't do it last week. Had it all set up to do this week. Now I'm going to have to figure out how to do it at home. It's going to be a miserable thing. But anyway. And then now I've got to cut all that out of the recording. But the Bible is an inspired unit, even though it's 66 books, that it comprises all of what God has to say to men. There's no other lost books of the Bible. We can have a class on that if you want. There's not some other book that God gave to Joseph Smith that the Mormon Church lives by that comes from God. There's not the Bhagavad Gita or the book of that's a Hindu book, Bhagavad Gita, inspired by Har Krishna. And the Vedas are their other Hindu scriptures. There's not. I mentioned the book. There's not the Book of Mormon. There's not. The Book of the Dead of the Egyptians and all. Those are not God's words. They're human words. Are they valuable? Yeah, they're interesting. But the Bible and the book all fits together. We'll come back to that. But the Bible fits together, even though it's very different in the different books. The books may be different, but they all tell the same story. So God has chosen literature or words to express his will to men. And we may not like that, but we therefore have to study the literature of the Bible as I would any other literature. Now that might throw you off. We read the Bible the same way we read other literature. Oh, are you saying the Bible is the same as every book? No, I'm not. I'm saying that if you want to understand the Bible, though, you have to understand how to read it as you would other literature. Is the meaning, and we'll come back to this, but the Bible, and I'm very grateful that the high school I went to was very insistent from the time that we were in elementary school. I see their policies now. Not only did we have to read so many books a year and write book reports on so many books a year from the 4th, 5th, 6th grade on, all the way through high school, we had to write at least a one-page essay every week in every class, written out in paragraphs and everything. We had to do a research paper every year from the 6th grade on, a big research paper with footnotes. So when I got to college, writing those papers was pretty simple. Not because I was smart, but because I'd done it for all that time. Do they do that now in school? No. You're lucky if the kids can read or write by the time they get out of high school. And I'm not trying to be mean. But the Bible is the same as other books in its form. It's made up of words and sentences and paragraphs and structure. It's infinitely different in its content and meaning. So when I say the Bible's like other books, I'm not saying it's the same as other books in what it means and its content. I'm saying its structure's the same. It has to be read the same. Now, the meaning of the Bible and what it's saying is infinitely more important. So God's an intelligent, logical being, and so is man, who's made in his image. The Bible is written from the mind of God in a logical, orderly way. It's intended for the mind of man. And we can understand it. Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 3:3-5, I wrote it down in a few words whereby when you read it, you may understand my knowledge. God says you can understand what he wrote. Why? Because his mind, he made your mind corresponding to his mind. And therefore you can understand what it says. And that's not dependent on being super smart. Dependent upon being a human being and understanding what it is. Now this leaves aside, well, what about somebody that can't read? Okay. They still have to understand the literature, don't they? If you can't read, you're dependent on somebody else to tell you what it says, and guess what you got to do with it then? You still got to use your mind to understand the words they're saying to you. You still got to do it the same way, even if you can't read. Because you got to take the words they say to you, and what do people usually do? If you can't read, what did they do in ancient times? Well, one person read to the whole assembly. One person read it out loud. The other people's minds, who are human, listened to it, understood what it meant, did the best they could not to live it. So when God inspired men to write about a subject or an event in the Bible, here's the print. I got selectivity up here. Our time is about gone, but this is one of the most important aspects of Bible study, I think, that we have to pay attention to, that's overlooked. The word I chose, because probably somebody chose it for me, was selectivity. What's that mean? What's that word mean, selectivity? All right, I go to the watermelon bin at Walmart or Winn-Dixie. I walk up to the bin full of watermelons. Judy says, go get a good watermelon. Okay. I have my father's criteria, which are excellent criteria, which I should sell to you as to how to pick a good watermelon, because it's infallible. Okay? My father was a connoisseur of watermelons like I am. He knew how to pick them. And so I go and I look at these watermelons. That's how I hurt my back the last time I reached at the bottom of a bin, digging out all these big heavy ones, picked one out and lifted up, reaching way over there, pull it out of there, 50-pound watermelon almost. It's a criteria that's established. I'm selecting the watermelon that I want based on the criteria that I have. And I reject all the others. Selectivity is this. God, how much do you think God could say on any subject? Name a subject. How much could God say about it if he wanted to? An infinite amount. How much does he say about it? Are there lots of subjects he says nothing about in the Bible? Does this mean anything? I think it does. So when God inspired men to write about a subject or an event in the Scriptures, he did not inspire them to write all that could be written about it. And we'll come to this scripture in just a moment, John 20, verse 30, and John 21. Perhaps one of the most basic characteristics of inspiration, then, yet one of the most overlooked, is selectivity. God, of all the things he could pick out, he picked what he wanted you to know out of that subject. And so when you see that subject, when you read something, and that's what it says about it, like the second coming, when you read what God does say about it, is it all that I want to know about it? That's not even close to what I want to know about it. And so what do people do? Well, they just make up stuff then. Rather than saying, this is what God said, that's what I can know, and I believe that, and I'm going to leave the rest alone, or I'm not going to make it a law, whatever else it says. I'm going to respect what God wrote about it. And we need to see this. And it applies so many times. Here are the passages. In John 20, verse 30, speaking about Jesus' life, and truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. He did a lot more miracles, sign being miracles here. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So, Jesus did all these other miracles. God picked out, 8 or 9 in the book of John? These are enough right here. Pay attention. Now then, that makes every miracle in the book of John really important for you to dig in there and see what he's trying to get at, what it means. Because these are written that you might believe. Do you need all the other ones? Do you want to know what the other ones are? Well, sure, but do you need to know them? No, God didn't leave them for you. Well, now there's others in other books. But this is what he said. And he says a little bit over in, well, I thought I had both of them here. Do I not have both? Here, we'll do it this way. Didn't work right. Here's John 21, just the next chapter over. We got to stop it. And there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were to be written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. What's that tell you? He left a whole lot out and didn't. And the beauty of the Gospels is he uses so few words. I got books this thick on the crucifixion of Christ. How many pages do you think the Bible wrote about the crucifixion? A couple, 2 or 3. Men write that thick on it, of their own ideas. Which one should you pay attention to most of all? Okay? We got to stop, but I appreciate it. Anybody, did I hear a comment? All right, good.